and welcome to the Spawdcast. My name's Carrie Hyde, and I'm your host and your pet's life coach. Today, we're going to be talking about anxiety. And I know so many pet owners are dealing with their pets who have anxiety. It's actually the number one reason why dogs end up in the pound, because anxiety can come from all forms and people don't know how to handle it. So they end up releasing them into someone else's hands, whether that be a shelter, a foster home, the neighbor, or in some cases, pets just get out and unfortunately lose their lives because of the anxiety, being hit by cars or being killed by other wild animals. So it's a very, very, very important topic that we talk about. And so, of course, I need to bring on the experts if we're going to really dive deep into it and solve the problem. So today I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Erika Halle. Hi, Dr. Erika, how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you.
I'm so glad. For our listeners, a lot of times I will speak with veterinarians and I ask them if there's something that they are really passionate about, that they like to talk about, or something that they see a lot with. And it was great to hear Dr. Erika goes by Dr. Erika, so I'll refer to her as that. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. Please
She
do.
says a lot of times people pronounce her name wrong, so she just goes by Dr. Erika. I think that's great. So bringing you on and talking about this is something, this subject is something that is so dear to me because I have a boarding facility, so I deal with a lot of anxiety and I see a lot of that. So can you just tell us a little bit about what got you? I love to get some backstory from people who are on here because, you know, sometimes people just think, oh, she's a veterinarian, but there's usually this really interesting backstory. And I know that we briefly talked about it, but can you tell our listeners a little bit about how you got into veterinary medicine and actually went into holistic veterinary? Because you're different than most people start out conventional and go. So I'm going to let you tell the story. Go ahead.
Yes, and interestingly enough, I didn't tell this to you the other day, but the story of how I got into holistic medicine is actually tied into how I got into behavioral medicine and how that became such a big part of my practice.
Oh, wow.
So for my pre-vet school, my undergraduate school, I went to veterinary technician school. And so I had a lot of really practical experience and had learned animal anatomy and all of these things that are covered in the first year of vet school. So my first year of vet school, I had a lot of time to just sit and think. And I had spent a fair amount of time in small animal practice before as an assistant and a technician. So I was thinking about the fact that I was going to end up spending the rest of my life with an appropriate amount of drama on the rest of my life, giving vaccines to my healthy patients and antibiotics and steroids to my unhealthy patients. And at the time, I wasn't holistic, so I didn't think there was anything really wrong with that. I just thought it was going to be excruciatingly boring. And here I was spending all this time and money and energy on this degree, and I was going to probably leave school, practice for like 18 months, and then get bored and change careers. And so I had this crisis.
And that would be a very expensive change.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I was pondering. I mean, I was halfway through my first year, so I'd already invested a ton of money, not to mention my undergraduate degree that was pretty specific. And so here I was having this crisis, both a kind of personal crisis and this sort of financial crisis of this is not a good investment. But I had this colleague, thank goodness for her. She was really into sports medicine and she was going to do acupuncture primarily for sports medicine. So she introduced me to Chinese medicine. And, you know, I'd known about it before, but I hadn't really thought about it in the veterinary world. And I hadn't thought about doing it myself. So she introduced it to me as an option. And actually the two of us went on to refound the Holistic Club at Oregon State because we were both so passionate about holistic medicine. So I was able to do my acupuncture certification in my fourth year of vet school. So by the time I graduated vet school, I was, I think, one module away from being a certified veterinary acupuncturist as well.
Wow.
So I have never been a holistic or a conventional vet a day in my life.
That's so, you're literally the only person that I know that, I mean, I'm not saying there's not somebody else out there. I know Dr. Bug pretty much kind of knew, I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she kind of knew going in that she wanted to kind of go a little bit, but most go conventional. So I mean, that's awesome. I wish I could say that. I
Yeah,
can't. I have guilt, but go on.
so while I was taking the acupuncture course during my year of clinics, I had also the previous year, my third year, because I didn't want a puppy my fourth year. I'd gotten a puppy my third year in vet school, and he was insane, absolutely insane. He didn't have anxiety, thank goodness.
Yeah.
He was a Doberman, and he had these weird OCD behaviors. He didn't have anxiety or separation anxiety, but the instant that we would put him in his crate, like we could be standing right there and he would be super happy, and he would just start tearing his blankets into strips and eating them. And just like this obsessive behavior that he was doing, it was so bizarre.
Yeah.
And I had no solution for a while. For a while, we just had him sleep on nothing, which was terrible. It hurt my heart.
Yeah.
But in my acupuncture course, we talked about this condition that the kind of translation of the ancient Chinese text is saying that somebody is dancing on the rooftop naked crazy. So like mentally disturbed in a way that is just bizarre. And the example that the teacher used was this horse that used to get turned out and then it would lunge itself. So it would just run in 20-meter circles all day long in the pasture for no good reason. So that kind of level of crazy. And I thought, oh, that's my dog. That's Balder right there. He's insane. So I put him on the herbs that are so good for this. And I kid you not, he was so sensitive, because this is very much an exception. Within 12 hours of his first dose, that blanket eating behavior completely stopped. It was unbelievable.
Wow.
Absolutely unbelievable.
And was that kind of your beginning? Because I don't know how much you dealt with anxiety and those kind of behavior. Did that really kind of shape the way that you were going to run your veterinary practice?
Yes. I mean, obviously, I see a lot more than just behavioral cases, but because of that bizarre case of mental disturbance that he had, and because of how effective this was, when I didn't really see that there would be any kind of conventional solution for this other than just management, I really, and because of my own struggles with mental illness in my lifetime and my struggles with psychiatric drugs, I then was just on this path of attracting behavior cases. I didn't even try to do it. It just happened.
Yeah.
And it was great because I had these tools to be able to help them.
Yeah, those are the best tools when you've gone through it, not only in practice, but with yourself as well. Especially, I always think, if a doctor goes through something similar, then they understand. But when you're dealing with an animal who can't talk to you, but you can watch the behavior as a human to be able to go, I know what's happening possibly in your brain, and I'm going to be able to help you because maybe I went through it, or maybe I had a family member go through it who was able to talk to us. So how great for you to have that kind of connection. And I'm a big believer that we're put in positions for a reason. Like we either choose to use those or we don't, we let them go. So I'm sure you were kind of went through your path to get to this path, which is just kind of awesome. I know a lot of times when I talk to my clients, and if I use the word behavioral, they assume that means I'm saying that it's their fault or that they have a bad dog. Can you explain a little bit about what you mean when you say behavioral anxiety type situations?
Yes, absolutely. This is actually one thing that I'm kind of unhappy with our profession about. Because we can't talk to our patients, we are very hesitant to call things mental illness, even though that is clearly what a lot of these things are. I mean, I didn't train my dog to eat his blankets, and other than providing him with blankets, I didn't create any kind of situation that caused that to happen. He did weird things.
He didn't see you guys eating blankets.
Right. Yeah. We definitely were not eating blankets in front of him.
Okay.
Yeah. So officially, technically, when we're talking about mental illness in animals, cats, dogs, and horses is what I work with specifically, we technically call it behavioral issues. But, the vast majority of these behavioral issues have a basis in mental illness. I have certainly known a few patients, and some situations with my own pets where there was an issue and it was absolutely just a training issue. Definitely, that happens. But the majority of cases that I see, and because of who I am, the majority of the animals that I attract to me, they actually have real problems in their brain. You know, they have PTSD. Absolutely. I see that all the time in animals. Same thing as us. And we know now that there are changes that happen in the brain because of PTSD. It's not just some kind of behavior that you're doing. I have absolutely seen plenty of anxiety. I have met a couple of dogs and a few cats that I thought were probably bipolar, but again, it's really hard to diagnose these things when you can't talk to your patient and get them to tell you what life is like for them.
Yeah. I've seen dogs where the anxiety is just so bad, and and you just don't know where it came from. It just came out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. There's not anything, sometimes you can probably see how pets can match their owners, right? If you have a high energy anxiety owner and then they get a dog. But I've had dogs be like this, like you're saying, mental illness is the definite possibility with a client who I'm like, wow, she's like the most chill, calm, quiet. And now she has this animal who she, got from birth, and all of a sudden she's got this kind of tragic thing going on. It's nice to see some veterinarians in the field starting to recognize that, I think we spoke about, I told you I've seen puppies on Prozac, and they just jump into the Prozac without kind of looking into what might possibly be mental illness, which is just, do people, have you used that term with your clients? I think your pet has mental illness.
Absolutely.
How do they react to that?
A lot of times they haven't spoken to someone else first, and so it just makes sense to them. That just, that's, if they had this problem, that's what their doctor would tell them. Or if some of these patients come to me after a long journey of multiple vets, multiple trainers, sometimes multiple homes because of their issues, and they've been calling it a behavioral issue, and then when I say it's a mental illness issue, the owner, the guardian, just visibly relaxes, and they just have this sense of relief, like that it's actually a thing. When we say it's a behavioral issue, it's really, I really think it's not a great thing, because it puts this idea in everyone's minds that it's all in your head, the same kind of thing we have with mental illness in humans. And yes, of course, it is technically all in your head. It's a problem with neurotransmitters or the brain wiring or something like that. Right. But when people dismissively say it's all in your head, like it's something you're making up, and that's kind of what behavioral issue sounds like it's something that your pet is just doing this for attention, or you have trained them improperly, or if you just didn't spoil them, then maybe they wouldn't have anxiety or something like that. But when we refer to it as what it is, as mental illness, it really takes the responsibility off of everyone else in that pet's life. And certainly we still have a responsibility to create the right kind of environment, help them manage their behavior, all of that sort of thing. But it takes this idea that we somehow created the problem off of us. And that, I think, gives people a lot of freedom to really start to treat it, to really be on the same side as everyone else trying to treat it, because now they don't feel like it's their fault.
What's so interesting about what you're saying is I'm just trying to think of the reactions I get when I communicate with my clients. And if it's a senior dog, really senior, and I say it looks like he's experiencing some dementia, they can accept that quite a bit if I use the term dementia, because it's an older dog and people kind of understand what dementia is. But if they're not an older dog, we really won't look at it as being something that could be actually neurotransmitters in the brain. It's just so interesting how we can accept an older dog getting dementia, but we can't accept a younger dog, not necessarily a puppy, but a young non-senior dog having dementia. It's really quite interesting topic to kind of dive into. What are some of the symptoms? Like I've actually had people ask me this when they're bringing in for boarding, and I'll say, we always do a drop off, so I can kind of, if I've never met the dog before, I need him to come before you jump on a plane and leave. I want you to know what I'm experiencing. and I'll say they're experiencing anxiety, and people will tell me they don't, because the pet may not have had it at home. This is a
Mhm.
situational kind of situation, and they don't even know what the symptoms are of anxiety. Can you share with everybody a little bit about what the symptoms are and what would be considered anxiety? Maybe there's a difference between anxiety and like a more of a mental illness. Is there a difference?
No, I would say there's not. I'd say there's varying degrees. There is situational anxiety, there's mild anxiety, and some of that is normal. All of us experience anxiety at certain points in our life, and that's okay. But then there's the other extreme end of the spectrum where you have something like a phobia or a generalized anxiety disorder or something like that, where the symptoms are around most of the time. There may be situations that they're fine in, but they're very select situations, and that might not even exist. I've certainly had plenty of patients with generalized anxiety disorder, if I can say it like that. I mean, technically, we don't diagnose that in dogs, but I certainly have,
Yeah.
where there is no situation that they feel safe in. They always have some level of anxiety.
Oh,
And I think a big part of the problem is that we don't recognize it. Maybe it's situational, so you've not seen it, but usually my patients who have situational anxiety, they tend to be toward the more anxious end of the spectrum anyway, but people just aren't noticing it. I actually had a situation this morning working with
oh,
somebody alongside me who was working their horse, and I noticed the symptoms of anxiety happening, and it seemed that they did not, because my horse has anxiety. And so I've
yeah.
learned a lot about how to notice that at the earliest stages so that I can intervene and help her to manage that emotion. So some of the really early things that we see in dogs would be not being able to settle, having really over the top reactions to doorbells, something happening outside. I know some dogs just do that, but some dogs do that because they are hyper vigilant. They're always on high alert. They're always concerned that something bad is going to happen.
Oh,
Some of these dogs do destructive behaviors. We think about this a lot with separation anxiety. The extreme examples being dogs that eat through walls or doors because they're so panicked by
yeah.
being either separated from someone, or sometimes I think it's more claustrophobia. They feel trapped, and so they've just got to get out at any cost. Um, or perhaps they destroy other objects. I have seen dogs, particularly because I do house calls, so I work with dogs a lot in their homes. I do things to them that sometimes cause them some anxiety, and then I will watch them as soon as I release them, we're done, I'll watch them turn around and go immediately do what is actually a coping mechanism. But these coping mechanisms that they've come up with on their own are good ways for us to say there's some anxiety happening. They'll go and start obsessively licking themselves. That's a self-soothing behavior. Or they'll go start aggressively chewing at one of their stuffed animals, kind of trying to pull it apart, those kind of behaviors.
Yeah.
And we have this level of tolerance for that in our pets that I think is really, it's mostly due to lack of education, and it's kind of sad. And it means that a lot of individuals that have anxiety go without being noticed, and therefore not being treated until it's severe, until it's so bad that they are squeezing their way out of wireframe crates and lacerating themselves or chewing through a wall or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's important to notice those first signs. And really early signs are things like lip licking and what we call the whale eye, where they open their eyes really wide so you can see the white around the sides. A relaxed average dog, some dogs' faces are not built like this, but the relaxed average dog, you should not see the whites of their eyes when they just have their eyes open normally.
Yeah.
So if you can see that, they're at a high arousal level, whether that's anxiety or excitement or what have you.
You know what is so interesting is that a lot of the things that people do that cause anxiety, we can see it in pets, but then we consider it allergies. So like when you say excessive licking, if you think about it, people can get very nervous and they chew their nails, right?
Yes.
And chew their nails. But the second a dog licks his feet, he's getting a cytopoint. It's excessive licking. And I'm glad you brought that up. But have you found So let's talk about the licking. So what do you, if if a dog is just licking his paws and you basically ruled out allergies or ruled out everything else, what advice would you give? So, because that's probably, to me, when I see dogs licking their paws, I automatically say we gotta figure out if this is anxiety or if this is, and start with anxiety. But what are some of the things that pet parents can do to try to rule out whether they've actually got an allergy or possibly mental illness?
It can be really tricky. The other thing is OCD absolutely exists in dogs. It's really common in Dobermans, actually. This lick granuloma is what we call it, but it's OCD. But they get in this obsessive compulsive licking cycle. So that's another over licking mental illness. And the reason it's tricky is once they get started, it's a self-rewarding behavior. It releases endorphins, it makes them feel a little better. So they'll just carry on. And that can lead to the skin being irritated if they're doing the bottoms, insides of their toes, between their toes. It's nice and dark in there, and now they're making it moist and warm. So now they can get yeast or bacterial infections happening, even though that's not the primary problem. Now it looks like allergies because we've got all these other things we associate with allergies.
Yeah.
So it's tricky if you don't notice it immediately. If you notice it when they first start doing it, then you can look and see, is the skin irritated? Are they itchy anywhere else? That's actually a really good one, regardless of the stage. If they're itchy all over, then they're probably not licking their feet for anxiety unless the itching is giving them anxiety. They're probably doing it because they're itchy. But if they're only licking their feet, and if you look when they first start, before there's a chance for secondary infections and things to happen because of the licking, and the skin looks normal, then it's probably not allergies. It's probably more an obsessive compulsive or anxiety related behavior. I have a little bit of an advantage here because of doing Chinese medicine, which allows me to see what the source of the problem is from a energetic perspective. And while allergies and anxiety sometimes have similar patterns, it's usually different enough that I can tell how much of this licking is skin inflammation and how much of this licking is coming from the mind. And then we can treat it appropriately.
I'm so very happy that you told our listeners this, because I have questioned constantly. Every dog that comes to me is on allergy medications. So many dogs are coming in and they're on allergy medications. And in some cases, they're just licking one paw. And I've questioned forever, how, if I had allergies, one foot wouldn't flare up, right? Like one,
very rarely, yes.
Right. Like, what are the odds that it's just this one little paw that is licking? And so it's heartbreaking to see these animals end up down the wrong path and the cause actually get. And so I'm just glad you brought that up, because I've been trying to tell people constantly, which is why I started the podcast, because I needed experts to come on and help people understand, to go a little bit deeper, not just get that quick fix and see if it'll go away, because it usually will lead you down a worse path, just like we see in humans, right?
Yes.
You get that anxiety pill and then, it goes from there. So
actually, it can be worsened by that too. Antihistamines sometimes can be helpful for anxiety. Hydroxyzine particularly, which happens to be my favorite antihistamine for dogs. But Apoquel, I have had more than one patient now that got put on Apoquel because they genuinely had a skin issue. And I disagree with using Apoquel at all, but that's a whole different story. And the Apoquel made their underlying existing insecurity, anxiety issues much worse, and sometimes permanently. I actually have a dear bulldog patient who always had like stranger danger anxiety stuff, and then he got skin stuff, definitely genuinely had skin stuff. Then he got put on Apoquel, and then his stranger danger insecurity anxiety got so much worse. Then he came to me and we got him off the Apoquel, got his skin resolved, but the anxiety, we've been managing it, but just getting him off the Apoquel didn't improve it at all. It was still worsened based compared to what it was before the drug. So if there's a question about whether it's anxiety or allergies, then I would definitely stay away from Apoquel. And I haven't seen this with Cytopoint yet, but Cytopoint and Apoquel work in basically the same way. So I wouldn't be surprised if I saw it as a result of Cytopoint.
Yeah, it's interesting about the drugs. Apoquel's been around a little bit longer, so now we know when Apoquel first came out, right? Everybody thought it was the great drug. And do you think that's because of how little the studies are done for our animals? Like they're not very long, right?
Oh, but they're not for humans either. This is one of my pet peeves, and I could talk about this for hours. I think the main reason is because, first of all, with allergies specifically, if you're a conventional vet, and really no matter who you are and what tools you have, they are very difficult to treat. So when something comes out that looks like a silver bullet, we typically glom onto it. I'm always suspicious of new drugs because they aren't very well tested.
Right.
But generally, especially if it's for allergies, people are gonna just flock to that. And then we find out different that it's not so good. The other problem, and this is a major problem in the human medical industrial complex, and in veterinary medicine, it exists with drugs. It's worse for food, for prescription diets and things like that. But we doctors are really busy. So when something new comes on the market, we typically don't read the studies. But some drug rep or food rep, depending on what we're talking about, shows up and says, hey, we've got this new thing. It's amazing. Look, here's an abstract of this study, this internal study that we ran in our company, and look how amazing this drug is. Sure, sometimes some little things happen, but it's not a big deal because look, it can really solve this problem that you're having. And that's it. That's where we stop. We're just like, yes, this is amazing. I don't even need to read the whole text of this study. I don't need to read any other studies. I'm just going to use it because it sounds incredible. And then, of course, these drug reps and food reps, they're salespeople. So we should think about the fact that they're being paid to sell this product to us. And they're going to, of course, minimize the downsides and maximize the upsides when they talk to us about it. So if we don't do our own independent research, we're going to have this very biased idea of what this product does. We're going to use it thinking that it's great because the drug rep said it was great. And then we're going to have a bunch of patients that get cancer or have worsened anxiety or whatever the problem happens to be with that drug. And maybe have caution then later, but that first group of patients that we treated with that drug when it first came out, we didn't have that caution for. Yeah, it's a big, big problem.
We saw that with DCM, dilated cardiomyopathy, where we had veterinarians who were just reading the heading of the articles that were coming out. Yeah, but they weren't reading all the way through because if they I'll just give you a quick example of why. I'm not saying you can't trust all vets because there are some great vets out there. I'm just saying you have to be careful. When DCM came out, that whole situation, I had a client come in and she said that her vet told her dog would die if she continued to eat this kibble. And I said, what was the solution? And she said he told her just to add rice to the kibble.
Yes.
And so I thought, there's no way he read the whole article. There's no possible way he read the whole article to add rice, because even though the article's right came out against, not feeding pets grain-free food, they never said add rice. So I'm like,
right.
Yeah.
And that's still the solution that they're a proponent of. If you're doing a homemade diet or a raw diet that doesn't have grain, they're like, oh, that might be bad for the heart. Let's add some grain. And I'm over here thinking, when in vet school did you ever learn that grains have anything in them that's good for the heart?
Yeah.
There's nothing in grains that is particularly supportive of the heart. I mean, they're not maybe definitely unhealthy for the heart, but there's nothing in them that is like CoQ10 or something like that we know is supportive of heart health.
Yeah, it was interesting because it was kind of my first thought of, wow, vets are just people. I don't want to discredit all of their schooling, but it's human nature, especially when you're a busy person, to just kind of trust. And I know that those articles came out and the American Veterinary Board was putting out some articles. And so it's human nature to just kind of trust. I've been victim of that, where I had a distributing company who I completely thought was only bringing on really great food. And so and now I'm very careful. But back then I thought, oh, if this distributing company is carrying it, I'm going to trust them and I'm not going to do my own due diligence. And now I know better, because what I define as good and what other people do may not be the same. So we have to be careful with that. Just like going back to the apples.
Always have to follow the money.
I know.
The people
No,
who are telling us this, who are they being paid by? What is their interest in this? Are
yeah,
they really unbiased and giving us, we like to think that science is unbiased, but it really never is.
yeah,
And there are cases in which it is especially not unbiased, and we need to be very careful of that.
yeah, yeah. It's everywhere. It's not just in veterinary medicine, but going back to anxiety, so you briefly touched on the fact that there's situational anxiety and then there's more of the, so what are some of the things that pet parents can do, or that you mentioned some herbs that you were able to use that can help? What kind of things, I mean, sometimes just taking a dog for a walk, I don't want to minimize the fact that they have that anxiety, but sometimes just the boredom that they see. But what other things can people use to help with anxiety?
So I always do a multi-pronged approach. And I always recommend that people work with a trainer, particularly a positive reinforcement trainer. I'm really opposed to doing any corrections except maybe a vocal correction if something is happening that's going to hurt someone immediately. But especially if we have anxiety, these patients that have anxiety are typically very sensitive. So even raising your voice can be potentially traumatic for them. And then you've got trauma, and then you've got PTSD, and we just compound the problem. So I always tell people that, if you had a mental illness, anxiety, or something else, you would want help from some kind of provider, whether that's drugs or herbs or whatever you want to do there. And you would also want to go to therapy. So we don't really do therapy for dogs, but training, especially if you work with a trainer who is experienced with anxiety, training is the way that we do therapy for dogs. We help them to get desensitized to their anxiety triggers and things like that. And teach them coping behaviors actually with a really good trainer who knows about anxiety. So training is like therapy, so that's important. In some mild cases of anxiety, that's enough. Just like for some people who have mild anxiety, just going to therapy is plenty. You don't need anything else. So sometimes starting with that is great. Making sure that you've got plenty of environmental enrichment happening. If they are sitting around bored, especially in environments that are not natural for them, which most of our home environments aren't. And particularly for dogs, cats are cool with being left alone for 12 hours at a time. That's normal cat clan behavior. But dogs do not do that. Dogs are together all the time when they're in their normal social environment.
Right.
And that's not how modern human life is. So we need to be aware of that and make sure that we're providing them with enriching toys, things like Leaky mats or puzzle toys, things that really engage their brain. And the Leaky mats help take advantage of that licking, releasing endorphins without destroying anything
I
or
love those
destroying
lick mats.
themselves.
I love
They're
those
really
lick mats.
great.
Yeah.
So that's really important. And then for the more severe cases, the other things that I add in are food therapy, which is something that you can kind of do on your own without a holistic vet even. And herbs. And herbs are typically pretty custom. So there are some formulas that work pretty well, generally speaking. I know Herbsmith has a couple on the market. Calm Shen is their formula for kind of regular generalized anxiety. And then they have another formula called July the 3rd that's for more situational anxiety, obviously marketed for fireworks, but works for other things too.
Yeah, I use that. I use both of those in my place and have had
they're really great products.
Mm-hmm.
And they cover the main, because the Herbsmith does Chinese herbal formulations. They cover the two main syndromes, Chinese syndromes that cause anxiety. So they'll work for most dogs. For some more complex cases, they're not going to work as well, and we need a little different approach. And then as far as food goes, I actually saw this with my own dog and his mental disturbance. The hotter the food is, the more mental disturbance we're going to see. And I mean that energetically. So energetically hot things, we can talk about the energetics of the ingredients. So for example, chicken is a very hot protein, whereas pork is a cooling protein. So you want to stay away from the hotter proteins like chicken or lamb. Those are two really of the hottest proteins that we regularly feed dogs. Most of the other things we feed dogs tend to be more on the kind of neutral warm to cooling kind of spectrum with proteins. And then the other thing to consider is the format of the food. Because of how it's been processed, kibble is very hot, no matter what it's made of. A fish-based kibble is going to be cooler than a chicken-based kibble, but compared to home-cooked poached chicken, it's probably still going to be a little hotter. So we want to stay away from kibble. Canned food is a good option if you have to have a processed food. It's not nearly as hot as kibble, but even better is doing a lightly cooked, either home cooked or commercial. There are commercial lightly cooked diets now. Or if your dog can process it, raw food really helps. So my dog got this when I was in vet school. I was a poor vet student and was using kibble through, fortunately we managed to get a more holistic kibble for a student buying program. So we were using that, and that was a nightmare. And then I was able to switch him at one point to a fish-based kibble, and he got 10% better just from that food switch. Then I graduated and got a job and was able to feed him raw. And I would say that he improved probably 50 to 70% just from switching from kibble to raw, because
Wow.
raw food is so much colder. It really helped with all of his excess heat, mental disturbance kind of problems. So the food is a major component here.
What do you think about feeding? Turkey has tryptophan in it. Does that seem to be a food that you would want to feed a dog who has anxiety?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Turkey is one of the meats. There's a little bit of argument about the meat temperatures, but in my experience, turkey is a cooling meat. So it's
okay.
actually turkey, venison, beef, pork. These are the four that I regularly recommend for my patients who have anxiety.
Oh, good.
Rabbit's a good one too, but it can be
I'm
costly.
glad you said that, because I recommend turkey a lot for dogs that have anxiety. We
Mhm.
did a test case, and this is going to lead us into the next few questions, but I did a test case on a dog with animal biome, I'm sure you're familiar with, which is the gut therapy. And that's what we did, is we just changed the diet, and then she was on Prozac. She was on heavy doses of Prozac, and it really wasn't doing much. As soon as the Prozac wore off, the anxiety was just out. It was so bad. And so we just changed her took her off the kibble, put her on a turkey food. It was actually small batch that we put her on, and then started to restore her gut. And the results were, not only were the results visible for us to see, but we also ran the tests and we could watch the bacteria's change. There was a particular bacteria, and this is where I'm going to get into this section where we could talk a little bit about the gut and the bacteria. Is that, can you just tell us a little bit about if you know of any studies that are being done on anxiety? I know there are some with people, but do you know of any studies as far as the gut and anxiety for dogs, cats, horses?
I think I have heard of one for dogs. I'm not sure where they're at with it, if it's out yet or if they're still working on it. This particular part of biome science is very, very young, and it's very exciting.
Yeah.
There, like you said, there's been more research done in humans, and even there, we just are barely scratching the surface and barely starting to understand it. But if you notice now, if you go into a health food store and you look at the probiotic section, there are probiotics for anxiety, there are probiotics for weight loss, there are probiotics for immune support, all of these things
Crazy.
now. And most of it is not just marketing. Most of it is based on these still very early studies that are being done that are showing that certain strains of bacteria really help with certain issues. Now, of course, that doesn't apply to everybody. Not everyone with anxiety has a dysbiosis happening, but certainly a good population of individuals with anxiety do. And what these studies are telling us is that these microbes that live in our gut have at least as much, possibly more, influence on our system as our own endocrine system does. So when it's messed up, it's really hard to restore balance to your overall system without addressing the biome. This, with the weight loss one, it's a really good one because there's a little bit better research on it. They've found that there are certain strains of bacteria in your gut that just will absolutely boost your appetite. And if you don't take care of that, weight loss is going to be a real uphill battle because you're constantly going to be eating even when your body doesn't need it. But these microbes are saying, feed us more, and then telling your brain to feed you more.
Dang it.
And if you can reduce that population and increase other populations that they've identified, it will have an appetite suppressant effect. So the behavior stuff is not quite that clear yet, but I suspect someday soon it will be, and that we'll find certain strains that are associated with anxiety or perhaps just mental imbalance generally, and other strains that are definitely associated with calming. And certainly if your gut is unbalanced, that's going to lead to potential issues like leaky gut syndrome, which can lead to generalized inflammation in your body. And then from the Chinese perspective, the vast majority of these anxiety cases are related to heat in the liver, heat in the brain, and heat is also pretty much directly correlated to inflammation. So the more inflammation you have, the more your anxiety is going to be flaring up. And the more you can control your inflammation, the more beneficial effect you're going to have on the anxiety. Now, it's not certainly the only piece of the puzzle, but it is one of the pieces of the puzzle.
Can you we've talked about it on the show before, but just in case someone's only listening to this episode, explain a little bit about what leaky gut is?
Yeah, so in the intestine, there is this single layer of cells that's between all of the things that you've eaten and your bloodstream, really. And they're supposed to have these tight junctions between them that stop anything that's too big from going through. So only amino acids, not whole proteins, only teeny tiny carbohydrates, not big polysaccharides. And when there's enough inflammation in the gut, for whatever reason, whether it's a food related problem or a general systemic related problem causing gut inflammation, those tight junctions actually get leaky. They start to break down and things start to be able to pass between the cells instead of going through the cells. So the cells aren't filtering what's happening, what's crossing from your gut into your bloodstream anymore. So then we can get large pieces of proteins, in particular, proteins are the problem, that go from the gut straight into the bloodstream. And because that's not supposed to happen, and because these proteins are not your proteins or your dog's proteins, the body starts to have a reaction to them because they're not supposed to be there. And then, of course, we just get a positive feedback loop of inflammation happening. That makes the leaky gut worse, which lets more proteins in, which causes more inflammation, which makes the leaky gut worse, and so on and so forth, until you resolve it, hopefully.
Yeah, which could take a really long time, I understand.
Yeah. It can be a very complex situation, yeah.
So I'm kind of looking more into this, but it used to be that dogs would come in and we would see them, and even when I was a vet tech, they wouldn't start really having problems until they were about 2-3 years old. We would kind of say, oh, we know where you're going, in about 2 years. But now I'm seeing it younger and younger. Do you think that this is being passed down? Like, I've seen puppies that are already having IBD and issues from practically day one. Do you think this is caused from a generational problem?
Yes, absolutely. I just don't have any other explanation for it. One good example is when I was in vet school 10 plus years ago, we were told that puppies who are under 6 months of age are too young to have allergies. They haven't experienced the world enough to have reactive patterns built up to pollens or foods or whatever. And pretty soon after I graduated vet school, within 5 years, but I think it was sooner than that, I was seeing 4-month-old puppies, 2-month-old puppies that already had food issues, already had absolutely, definitely allergies, contact sensitivities to grass. They'd be fine. They'd go roll in the grass. They would turn bright red. You give them a bath, they're fine again. So there's definitely something happening with chronic inflammation causing epigenetic changes, which in the individual who has the inflammation, and then that individual gets bred, and those epigenetic changes get passed on to the next generation. So now the puppies, before they even come out and see the world the first time, while they're still inside their mother, they are already genetically encoded to be more sensitive than the previous generation was when they first came out. And I think this is compounded by poor diet and vaccine damage and all kinds of things, and increased toxins in our environment, things we can control and things we can't control. But yes, absolutely. I'm seeing all kinds of problems younger and younger, sensitivities, mental disturbances, anxiety issues,
I
You know, puppies have
know.
their normal fear periods, but uh, I've had some patients that they go into their normal fear period and then they never come out. And
Yeah.
now we have an anxious dog.
I know. It's just younger and younger. And I think about it and I'm like, gosh, if we keep going this way, we're not, I mean, the oldest living dog on record back in 1929 was 30 years old. His name was Bowie. And he was a large dog. And then, of course, we all know about Maggie. I'm sure most people know about Maggie. I went a little further and wanted to know. But in 1929, all of the Guinness Book World Record dogs were living to be 28, 29, 30. A lot of them. It was tons of them. And then I look back and think, okay, what is different? Because we have more technology now, we have more money now, we have more access to things now. We're bringing our animals indoors. So what is it? And then you kind of look back and go, well, kibble wasn't available.
Exactly. And most people didn't vaccinate their dogs very
Yeah,
often, which vaccines have their place, but over vaccination is absolutely an issue.
yeah,
And I think that breeders did a little bit better job back then of breeding the way that livestock breeders breed, where if somebody has a health problem, that's an expensive animal because now you've got to spend a bunch of money on veterinary care. So you don't want to breed that animal because you don't want that to continue. You want
yeah,
animals that are going to make you the most profit, so they need to be inexpensive. And I've worked with some breeders and had to work on this mindset of this dog has chronic ear infections, but otherwise look at the conformation. They're beautiful and they've got a great temperament. And so I'm going to breed them. And I'm just like, no, don't do it. They have a chronic health issue and you are going to pass this on. We need to be selecting, yes, very good temperament. Yes, good conformation, not just breed standard conformation, but functional conformation, healthy conformation. And we need to be selecting for other aspects of physical health. So we don't want to
yeah.
breed individuals who have allergies. We don't want to breed individuals who have anxiety. You know, if we're really going to be smart about breeding and really breed for the benefit of the breed, that's where we need to go.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is they all say that until it requires. A while back, well, she just turned 9, so my golden just turned 9 years old, and my husband wanted to get a puppy, so he went and got a puppy, and she was born with ichthyosis. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's not real super common, but she's a golden retriever. And when I called the owner, she acted like she had no idea. She didn't care. She said, I'm crazy. And I said, well, no, I'm not. I actually have a diagnosis for this. And it had to have come from one of her pets. And so you would think a reasonable and responsible breeder would stop breeding, but she didn't. And she continued to breed those same dogs. And yet all of her website and all of her stuff says about all her health certificates and all of this stuff, which is a really sad thing because those health certificates were lies. They were just straight out lies because I had already told her that she had a puppy that was born with this and it's genetic. So you got to be careful. Some of these breeders just, because what are you going to do? Bring the dog back? No, I was already in love with her by the time
Right. Exactly.
by the time one day, I'm like, what are you going to do? So, but it's the anxiety is keeping pharmaceutical companies. I mean, the amount of, because I do boarding, you would not believe the amount of anxiety pills that get brought into my facility. And it's just by the truckloads. There's so many dogs on Prozac and I don't know. And without the
so
conversation,
it's so concerning because I know from my own personal experience with Prozac specifically, but also from learning about psychiatric drugs in general, unless you have a really good diagnosis, you apply a psychiatric drug to that patient and you might make them much, much worse if you've misdiagnosed them or you don't have a good diagnosis. And like we covered in the beginning about our hesitance to even call it mental illness as an industry in dogs.
yeah.
How, if we can't even admit that it's mental illness, how are we going to diagnose it appropriately enough that we're going to put them on the right drug? This is part of why I really try to avoid psychiatric drugs in dogs and cats and stick with the Chinese medicine, because Chinese medicine gives me other tools to be able to decide what the right formula is for them. So I don't have to sit down and talk to them about how they're feeling in order to figure out exactly what their psychiatric diagnosis is.
So here's an interesting thing, and I've heard different vets and different homeopathic veterinarians talk differently about this. I'm curious as to what you think. So let's assume you have a high anxiety dog who will go through windows. It's horrific. And it will take time, right? Diet doesn't work overnight. We don't do it. So how do you feel about using a drug temporarily while the other is coming, or is that just a no?
I do that sometimes, yes. There are some drugs that I feel comfortable doing that with. I have had a total of 1 cases that trazodone worked really well for, but
Yeah.
in most cases, I don't find trazodone works great for anxiety. Personally, I use a lot of Xanax in that kind of situation.
In that case.
But that's
That's
really
what I was
tricky. I know a lot of vets are very nervous about using controlled substances anymore. And while Xanax doesn't have the same addiction problems as opiates do, there's still, particularly at the doses dogs need it, there's still this concern about diversion. Fortunately, my practice is small enough that I have close enough relationships with my clients that I feel really totally fine about prescribing them Xanax for their dogs. And I know how much they care about their dogs. So I know that they're not going to steal their dog Xanax because their dog really needs it.
That's a whole nother subject, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So some of the basic, like what we call rescue meds, like Xanax, they're pretty good at doing what they're supposed to do and not causing a bigger problem. I mean, certainly they have side effects, there's all of that, but as far as if you don't get your psychiatric diagnosis correct and you give somebody Xanax, you're probably going to be safe. You're probably not going to cause a flare up of some other kind of aspect of the mental illness. So I use that a fair amount when we're in that kind of, things are really like someone's going to get hurt bad right now.
Right.
And we need something immediately.
Yeah. Like 4th of July. I mean, there's times where, back when I had I used to have another facility and we did big dogs there, and we had a German Shepherd come stay with us for 4th of July, and the mom forgot to bring his stuff.
Oh, no.
And so, it was really tragic because now here I am, she drops him off on the way to wherever she's going. And it's, 6 o'clock already at night, fireworks are already starting to go. And I've got this giant German Shepherd that literally 2 of us had to sit in the corner with him and hold him all night long. And he needed that. I don't think there was a CBD or, anything that would work for that kind of thing. And sometimes I feel really bad for the dogs that people get so deep into holistic and so deep into it that they forget sometimes we might need to, for their own safety, give them something a little bit stronger.
Yes, and then emergencies exist in mental illness as well as, breaking a bone. And Western medicine is really good at managing emergencies. And so we need to use it for what it's really good for, and then use other things for things it's not so good at.
Right. How long do you think, if you have like the dog I told you about that we used the animal biome test and we did all of that, it was about 6 months before we really started to notice it. But have you seen any patterns in your practice with dogs that, like, once you change their diet, I'm assuming you do probiotics and those kind of things to try to restore the gut?
I actually don't do probiotics a lot in anxiety cases unless there's a really clear correlation to gut issues happening. Mostly I use diets as far as diet changes and herbs. I use a lot of herbs. And I have found that in most cases, certainly this is not the case for super severe cases, but in most cases, the herbs are going to start working and give you at least a noticeable, significant percentage of improvement by the end of the first month. So I prescribe things and then I do a recheck at 1 month so we can make sure that the herbs are right, that they're going to be the most effective, that they're on the right dose, all of that. And by the time I see people back at that 4-week mark, they usually have noticed a significant difference. Things are usually not resolved yet. Usually takes longer than that to resolve it, but they're seeing some relief already.
Yeah. What are some of I know you had mentioned Herbsmith, which is really very user friendly because it's pretty easy and it was created by a veterinarian as well. And so, but are there some, like if somebody wanted to just go get just a plain herb? Is there herbs that you recommend for anxiety just by themselves, or do they all need to be combined?
So when it comes to Chinese herbs, I definitely, other than the Smith herbs, that they've done a really good job at making those very safe and very user friendly, because with Chinese herbs, it is possible to send things in the opposite direction of how you want them to go if you use the wrong formula. So other than those formulas, I really recommend that people work with a veterinarian who has learned Chinese medicine, knows how to prescribe the herbs properly. But on the Western herbal side, things like skullcap, which actually is used in some Chinese formulas, valerian and passion flower, those three can be really helpful. And I know that lots of health food stores carry them as tinctures or extracts and capsules because humans use them. I
Yeah.
find that generally speaking, those are less effective than the Chinese herbs that I use, but for a mild to moderate case, they could certainly be plenty. You know, most of the cases I see are pretty severe. So we
Yeah.
need really, really strong herbs.
How do you feel about mixing like a CBD with, say, like an herb smith? Have you seen that work, or has that been necessary to do, or how do you even feel about CBD?
I love CBD. I think it's amazing for pain and inflammation. I have had mixed results for anxiety, and I have a theory about why that is. So CBD is a cannabinoid. And if you don't know by now, we all of us mammals have an endocannabinoid system. So our bodies have these receptors on our nerves that are essentially built for cannabinoids, and our bodies make cannabinoid-like neurotransmitters that bind to them naturally. And some people's endocannabinoid systems, some dogs, some cats, some horses, are deficient. So if you have a deficient endocannabinoid system and your symptom of it is anxiety, then taking CBD is going to eliminate your anxiety. And so I've seen probably, I would say 10% of people who have a pet with anxiety and have tried CBD before they come to me have had success with CBD, which is a low percentage, but it's not nothing. It's a significant percentage. It's
Yeah,
absolutely worth trying.
especially if
And I
it's
know
your
now,
dog.
yes, I know now there are a lot of products on the market that are doing blending things, like the CBD dog calm formula has essential oils in it as well as CBD. So it's got some lavender to help with anxiety. So products like that are going to be even more effective than the 10% that just CBD alone is helpful. Also with dogs, because dogs are so sensitive to cannabinoids, CBD included, it is possible to give them relatively easily a high enough dose that they feel a bit sedated. And I don't think sedation is a good solution for anxiety, but in an urgent situation, it is a good way to manage it. So it's possible. You know, a lot of these products say start at this dose, and if you don't see a change, then double the dose or triple the dose. And it's very safe to do that. It's really hard to overdose a dog on CBD. It's possible, but it's very hard. But it is relatively easy to give them enough that they're sedated. So if you have a case of extreme anxiety and the thing that's going to cause anxiety is happening tomorrow and you've
Yeah,
got nothing, CBD is absolutely a viable option for a good portion of dogs, at least
yeah,
as a kind of emergency thing. And I combine CBD with herbs in my patients all the time for all kinds
yeah.
of different things. And I find that it works really well and often synergistically.
Oh, awesome. In the beginning, you had mentioned antihistamines can also help a little
Mm.
bit, and you had mentioned one. Can you just tell it? I mean, you just said it, like if you're in a pinch and like, oh my gosh, tomorrow's 4th of July and it's, I don't have anything, but I might have some antihistamines in my cupboard. Is there something that you would recommend that you think might work if you have to?
So I know some people use Benadryl for anxiety. That's similar to the CBD situation where most of the time it's working just because it's sedating them. So in a pinch,
Yeah,
it can be okay. It, like for us, Benadryl doesn't make everybody drowsy, so it doesn't sedate every dog, but it does sedate quite a few of them. So it is a reasonable solution. The one I find that works the best actually in human medicine is mostly used for its anti-anxiety sedative effects rather than for its antihistamine effects. It's called hydroxyzine, In the United States, it is prescription only. So that's something you'd have to have your vet help you get. It's my favorite antihistamine for dogs. I find that it works more reliably than any of the other antihistamines on the market as an antihistamine. If you happen to live in Canada, it is available over the counter in Canada. So that's a possibility if you're there.
I love Canada. God bless the Canadians. So when you're giving something like a Benadryl and you're giving it for anxiety or you're giving it for allergies, if it doesn't if the antihistamine doesn't work and your pet is still licking, is that a really good indication that you don't have an allergy but you have mental illness going on?
Unfortunately not. You know, the reason that we've got, I don't know, a dozen antihistamines on the market is because for us humans and for everybody else, a lot of them don't work for everyone. So, you know, maybe Claritin doesn't work for you, but Zyrtec does. So if you take Claritin, you're still going to have the same level of allergy symptoms, even though your problem is allergies. So just because the Benadryl is not helping the itching doesn't mean it isn't allergies.
Yeah, well, that would be a bummer because that'd be a great test, right?
I know.
Nope, I gave him the Benadryl and he's still itching, so it's got to be something else. If only they could talk to us. Dr. Erika, I don't want to keep you so much longer, but I want our listeners to know you're going to be very excited about this, but Dr. Erika does consultations. Can you tell us a little bit about how you would go about doing that to a listener that isn't near you or can't get to you? Can you tell us how that works?
Absolutely. So I do distance consultations over the phone usually. Sometimes I use a Zoom platform if we're really super international. And what I like to do is I like to have people get me recent records with a physical exam that's at least within the last year, depending on the problem. We might want something that's more recent than that. And of course, any test results that you've got. Because I do Chinese medicine, I also have people send me a picture of the tongue. That's one of the major diagnostic things in Chinese medicine. Wow. And allows me to really get a good handle on the syndrome without being in the same room with the animal. And then we schedule a phone call and we talk about your concerns. I typically don't prescribe drugs other than one called naltrexone. I do low dose naltrexone phone consults because it's really amazing and most vets are not into it. But other than that, I typically don't prescribe drugs, but I absolutely do holistic things, absolutely herbs, diet, CBD. And if you are in the United States, I have herbal pharmacies, online herbal pharmacies I work with, or we can mail things directly. So it's very easy to get the prescriptions and get things working.
That's awesome. And so how would they get a hold of you? Through
the easiest way is to send us an email at contact@healinghandspetvet.com.
Awesome. So that's going to be in our show notes to all of our listeners, so you can get a hold of that anytime. I will have your information connected onto my website, so they'll be able to contact you there as well. So I just don't know if there's any last things you want to make sure that the listeners know coming from you. Is there any last minute, make sure you do this?
Ideally, please don't feed kibble. I'm super passionate about food, and actually, I wanted to mention that if someone out there is interested in this system of food medicine with Chinese medicine, it is something that you can relatively easily manage to do at home if you've got the right information. And I actually have a course available on my website that tells you how to find your pet's constitution, awesome. How to do a basic syndrome differentiation thing so that you know what kind of food you're looking for, and then talks about the energy of different foods and how to select the right food. There's also a book on Amazon, but the course is really much more in depth than the book.
Yeah, we're very similar, because that's the one thing I say the same thing, just don't feed kibble. I used to sell kibble in my store. I could no longer do it. I just came to a point where I said, all I do is constantly defend it and say, well, it's, if you have to. I got tired of saying if you have to. And And I recognize it can be expensive, or it can be more time consuming if you want it to not be expensive. But it just came to a point where it would be much like someone, to me, it's much like a doctor trying to heal a human and then selling them McDonald's. It doesn't work.
Yeah. Or here, drink 3 Ensure every day and you'll be fine. Like, could you imagine what your health would be like if all you did was drink Ensure? Sure, it's nutritionally complete and balanced, and it's technically got everything you need to survive, but it's not, processed food is just, it's not just very good at all. And it's not what our bodies evolved to process. So it leads to all kinds of issues.
I know with the amount of dogs that I do with boarding, I could tell you the most anxious dogs are the dogs that are on kibble. It's just the most anxious dogs are the dogs that are on kibble. And I'm not trying to call out anybody. I recognize not everybody has the information and all of those things, but I think that was a good thing to end on when we're talking about anxiety, because it's related. It's high in sugar, it's high in carbohydrate. It's, come on. So I just want to thank you so much for coming and taking this time out of your day to help educate all of our listeners. And it's just such a wonderful, warm feeling for me when I talk to people, because I always tell doctors I hid in the closet for a really long time. I didn't want to talk about my holistic views and my nutritional views because I knew I would get, poo-pooed. So it's just such a pleasure to have you come on the show and talk to everybody. And I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate you being here.
You're so welcome.
Yeah. So we'll keep you updated on everything. For our listeners, thank you so much for your continued support. You're listening to us. Please make sure you share this. You can, of course, contact us through avaspa.com. We have all of the videos on there, as well as our YouTube videos as well, too. So, all right, everybody, I'm going to sign off. Dr. I was going to say Halle. I was going to pronounce her name wrong. Can you believe that? It's Halle. Thank you so much, Erika. Take care.